small black boy stood in the doorway of the Michelin-starred restaurant, his worn sneakers tracking dirt across marble floors that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a month. His clothes hung loose on a frame that spoke of missed meals and broken promises. Marcus froze, his platinum fork suspended halfway to his mouth, the $300 Wagyu beef suddenly tasting like ash and guilt. The maitre d' rushed forward, his face twisted in professional disgust. "Security, we have a vagrant situation. Wait." Marcus's voice cut through the room like a blade. Because here's what nobody in that restaurant knew. That wasn't just any hungry child. That was the son Marcus pretended didn't exist. Marcus Cooper didn't build his billion-dollar tech empire by being soft. At 42, he controlled Quantum Dynamics, a company that revolutionized artificial intelligence for financial markets. His algorithms predicted stock movements with 94% accuracy, generating returns that made hedge fund managers weep with envy. But algorithms couldn't predict the human heart. They couldn't quantify the cost of choices made in desperate moments. They couldn't calculate the compound interest of abandonment. The Aurelius was San Francisco's most exclusive restaurant, where reservations required 6-month waiting lists and connections that money alone couldn't buy. Marcus ate here twice weekly, always alone, always at the same corner table that offered maximum privacy and minimal human contact. He preferred it that way. People were unpredictable. People had feelings, needs, expectations. People complicated the clean mathematics of profit and loss. His phone buzzed with the afternoon's trading summary. Quantum Dynamics stock had risen another 3%, adding $47 million to his personal net worth. Not bad for a Tuesday. He barely glanced at the numbers anymore. After the first $100 million, it all became abstract. What he didn't see was the small figure watching from across the street, building courage for a confrontation 10 years in the making. Elijah Williams was 10 years old, and already understood that some hungers couldn't be satisfied with food. He'd spent 3 hours outside the restaurant, watching men in suits that cost more than his mother's annual rent walk through doors that might as well have been barricaded with gold. His social studies teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had helped him track down Marcus's location after weeks of research at the public library. "Your father needs to know you exist," she'd said, her brown eyes fierce with the kind of righteous anger that comes from watching too many talented children go hungry. "He needs to see what his choices cost." Elijah clutched the envelope containing his school report card, science fair award, and a photograph of his mother from 10 years ago, when she still smiled like the world held possibility instead of just pain. His stomach growled for the 4th time in an hour. He'd given his lunch to his younger sister Maya, who was 6 and didn't understand why they ate peanut butter sandwiches, while other kids brought sushi and organic fruit. Elijah understood. Understanding was his specialty, forged from necessity and sharpened by disappointment. Through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see Marcus, his father, eating alone, surrounded by empty chairs, and the kind of isolation that money could buy but couldn't cure. Elijah took a deep breath and pushed through the heavy brass doors. The temperature inside the restaurant dropped 10 degrees when he entered. Not literally, but socially. Every head turned. Every fork paused. Every conversation died as eyes tracked the small black boy who'd violated the unspoken boundaries of class and privilege. The maitre d' materialized with the practiced urgency of someone trained to protect exclusivity. "Young man, this is a private establishment. I'm here to see my father." Elijah's voice didn't shake. Mrs. Patterson had made him practice that line 50 times until it carried conviction instead of hope. "I'm quite certain your father is not—" "Marcus Cooper, table 7. That's my dad." The maitre d's expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. Marcus Cooper was a regular patron whose tips exceeded most people's weekly paychecks. This situation required delicate handling. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation." Marcus looked up from his meal, irritation flickering across features that Forbes magazine had called inscrutable and Fortune described as emotionally efficient. That's when Elijah stepped forward into the light. That's when Marcus's carefully constructed world began its inevitable collapse. Before we continue, like this video and subscribe if you believe some truths refuse to stay buried. Marcus Cooper prided himself on his memory. Neural patterns, market trends, statistical anomalies. His mind cataloged and recalled information with machine-like precision. But he'd spent 10 years actively trying to forget one particular face. The boy standing before him had his mother's eyes, deep brown and questioning, framed by lashes that seemed designed to hold tears. But the sharp angles of his face, the particular way his left eyebrow arched when uncertain, the stance that suggested coiled energy barely contained. All Marcus. DNA didn't lie. Denial couldn't alter genetic truth. The restaurant had gone completely silent. 50 diners, 30 staff members, all witnesses to a collision between past and present that no algorithm could have predicted. "Daddy, I'm so hungry. Can I eat with you?" The words weren't accusatory. They weren't manipulative. They were simply devastatingly honest. A child's fundamental need stripped of pretense or pride. Marcus felt something crack in his chest, something he'd armored with years of emotional discipline and ruthless focus. He recognized this feeling from business negotiations. It was the moment when your opponent played a card you hadn't anticipated, when the game you thought you controlled revealed itself as something far more complex. The maitre d' reached for Elijah's shoulder. "Security is on the way. Touch him and you're done here." Marcus's voice carried the authority of a man who'd never been disobeyed. "In fact, everyone back to work. This is a private family matter." The room exhaled collectively and pretended to return to meals that would taste like guilt and uncomfortable privilege. Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit." Elijah approached slowly, clutching his envelope like a talisman. He'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. His father's joy at discovering him, his immediate embrace, his tearful apologies for the missing years. Reality was colder, more complicated, wrapped in expensive fabric and uncomfortable silence. He sat. The chair was too high. His feet didn't touch the ground, swinging slightly with nervous energy that betrayed his carefully practiced composure. Marcus signaled the waiter with a gesture that suggested vast experience with commanding service. "Bring everything on the children's menu, and the filet mignon, and the lobster bisque, everything." "I'm not that hungry," Elijah started. "Yes, you are." Marcus's eyes cataloged the boy's thin wrists, the way his shirt collar gaped, the shadows under eyes that should have been bright with childhood instead of darkened by adult worries. "When did you last eat a full meal?" "This morning. Cereal." "Before that?" "Yesterday. Peanut butter sandwich." "Before that?" Elijah's jaw tightened, and Marcus saw himself in that gesture. The stubborn pride that refused to acknowledge vulnerability even when drowning in it. The food arrived quickly. Professional kitchens responded to urgency, especially when the urgency came from a patron whose tips could pay a line cook's weekly salary. Elijah stared at the spread before him. More food than he'd seen in days, maybe weeks. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the fork, then stopped, looking at Marcus with uncertainty that broke something fundamental in the billionaire's carefully defended heart. "You can eat," Marcus said softly. It's okay. The boy ate, not with the refined manners that Marcus's world expected, but with the desperate efficiency of someone who understood that abundance was temporary and hunger was the reliable default. Marcus watched, his own meal forgotten, as 10 years of consequences materialized in front of him, one bite at a time. Her name is Jasmine Williams. Elijah spoke between bites, his voice matter-of-fact in the way children describe painful truths they've long since accepted. You met her when you were building your first company. She worked at the coffee shop near your office. You said she was beautiful and smart, and that you loved her. Marcus's fingers tightened around his wine glass. He remembered. Of course he remembered. Jasmine had been light in the darkness of 18-hour workdays and investor rejections. She'd believed in him when his own family called him crazy for abandoning a stable engineering job to chase startup dreams. You dated for 8 months, then she got pregnant. She told you about me when you were 2 weeks away from closing your Series A funding round. The boy's narrative was precise, clinical even, learned from his mother's careful explanation, rehearsed until emotion was replaced by chronology. You said you weren't ready, that a baby would destroy your company, that she needed to take care of it. Elijah made air quotes around the phrase, his small fingers mimicking adult cynicism with heartbreaking accuracy. She refused. You told her to leave and never contact you again. You said if she tried to claim paternity, your lawyers would bury her in paperwork that would take years and money she didn't have. Marcus wanted to interrupt, to explain the pressure he'd been under, the impossible choices, the way fear could make you cruel to protect something you'd built with years of sacrifice. But Elijah wasn't finished. Mom worked 3 jobs while she was pregnant with me. She cleaned offices at night, waitressed during breakfast, and did data entry in the afternoons. She saved enough to pay for community college, 1 class at a time, because she said education was the only thing nobody could take from us. The waiter refilled water glasses with professional invisibility, pretending not to hear a story that would be discussed in the restaurant's back kitchen for months. When I was born, she tried 1 more time to contact you. She sent pictures, my birth certificate, a letter saying she didn't want money. She just wanted me to know my father. Elijah pulled the envelope from his pocket, extracting a faded photograph. A young woman, beautiful and exhausted, holding a newborn with eyes that hadn't yet learned disappointment. On the back, feminine handwriting. His name is Elijah. He has your smile. Your assistant sent back a cease and desist letter. Mom cried for 3 days. Then she stopped crying and started working harder. Marcus took the photograph with hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts without trembling, but now shook, holding evidence of the past he'd tried to erase. You want to know the funny thing? Elijah's voice carried no humor. Mom never said bad things about you. Even when I asked why other kids had dads and I didn't. Even when the power got shut off because she chose groceries over the electric bill. Even when her car broke down and we had to walk 4 miles in the rain to get to my school orientation. He wiped his mouth with a napkin that probably cost more than his mother's weekly grocery budget. She said you were young and scared, that people make mistakes when they're afraid, that maybe someday you'd be ready to know me. The boy's eyes met Marcus's directly, and in them the billionaire saw judgment far more devastating than any SEC investigation or hostile takeover attempt. But I'm 10 now, Dad, and I don't think you're ever going to be ready. Marcus Cooper had built his empire on predictive models, on quantifying human behavior into patterns that could be analyzed, predicted, and exploited. But shame? Shame was an emotion he'd tried to delete from his operating system 11 years ago. It was inefficient, counterproductive, a drag on the ruthless focus required to build something from nothing. Looking at his son, and there was no denying the relationship now, not with those eyes staring back at him like genetic mirrors, Marcus understood that some debts accumulated compound interest that no amount of wealth could pay. Why now? His voice came out rougher than intended. "Why after 10 years?" Elijah pulled more documents from his envelope. School reports showing straight A's despite attending a school that couldn't afford new textbooks. A science fair certificate for a project about algorithmic pattern recognition, the same field that had made Marcus billions. A letter from Mrs. Patterson detailing Elijah's exceptional mathematical ability and the opportunities being wasted because his mother couldn't afford tutoring, couldn't provide the environment that talent required to flourish. "Mom got sick." The boy's voice cracked for the first time. "Breast cancer, stage 3. She's been doing chemotherapy for 6 months." The restaurant spun slightly. Marcus gripped the table edge. "She didn't want me to find you. Said we'd manage somehow. But I'm 10. I can't work legally. Our church helps. But Pastor Kyle has 17 other families who need assistance. We're about to lose our apartment." Elijah's composure finally shattered. Tears tracked down his cheeks, and he wiped them away angrily, ashamed of the weakness he'd tried so hard to hide. "I don't need you to love me. It's too late for that. But Maya, my sister, she's 6. She isn't yours, but she's all I have, and she cries at night because she's hungry. My mom can't work, and I can't. The boy who'd held himself together through poverty, through watching his mother waste away with disease, through the daily humiliation of lacking what other children took for granted. That boy finally broke. And Marcus Cooper, who hadn't cried since childhood, who'd trained himself to view emotion as weakness and sentiment as strategic liability, felt tears burning his eyes for the first time in 20 years. Because Elijah was right. The mathematics were suddenly, devastatingly clear. While Marcus had added billions to his net worth, his son had spent a decade in the dark, forced to grow up too fast to protect a little sister who wasn't even Marcus's responsibility, but had become his burden because Marcus wasn't there. The equation didn't balance. No amount of success could offset the fact that his son was a 10-year-old man, broken by a billionaire's cowardice. "Your mother," Marcus managed. "Where is she now?" "San Francisco General, 4th floor, room 417, the one with the shared bathroom and the machines that beep all night." Not the private suite at the exclusive medical center where Marcus's own board members received care. Not the concierge medicine service with personal chefs and rooms that looked like hotel suites. The public hospital where wait times stretched for hours and privacy was a luxury nobody could afford. Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers moving across the screen with the decisive speed that had built his empire. He hesitated, just long enough to realize this wasn't repair. It was responsibility. And responsibility didn't come with applause. Texts flew to his executive assistant, his personal attorney, his accountant. Some calls opened doors. Others only started processes that would take time. Time he'd already stolen once before. "What are you doing?" Elijah asked, confusion replacing tears. "Making a call," Marcus said. "One that's 10 years late." Within an hour, Jasmine Williams was transferred to a private room at San Francisco's premier cancer treatment center. The head of oncology, who'd trained at Johns Hopkins and published groundbreaking research on aggressive breast cancer treatment, personally reviewed her case. Within 2 hours, Elijah and his sister, Maya, were enrolled in the private school that fed students directly into Ivy League universities. The same school that Marcus's business partners' children attended, where annual tuition exceeded many families' yearly income. Within 3 hours, a moving company had relocated the Williams family from their roach-infested apartment to a furnished townhouse in Pacific Heights. Not a mansion, Marcus had that much self-awareness, but safe, clean, and close to both the hospital and the children's new school. Money could solve many problems quickly. Marcus had learned that lesson well. Some changes took days of paperwork and weeks of approval. But the process began that night, and nothing was allowed to stall. But it couldn't solve the fundamental problem staring at him across a table scattered with the remains of an expensive meal that would never truly satisfy the hunger those children had experienced. "I can give you things," Marcus said quietly. "Education, security, opportunities. I can make sure you and your sister never go hungry again. I can provide the best medical care for your mother." Elijah listened with the wary attention of someone who'd learned that promises from adults rarely materialized as advertised. "But I can't give you back the 10 years I stole. I can't undo the nights you went to bed hungry. I can't erase the times you needed a father and I was—" He paused, searching for honesty that his business training had taught him to avoid. "I was too much of a coward to be what you deserved." "Why?" The question was simple. The answer was anything but. Marcus looked at this boy, his son, and saw the opportunity to either perpetuate the comfortable lies he'd told himself for 10 years or tell the truth that might begin genuine healing. "Because I was terrified of failing. My parents were poor immigrants who sacrificed everything so I could succeed. Every day they reminded me that I carried their dreams. When I started my company, I poured everything into it. Not just money, my identity, my worth, my entire sense of who I was." He gestured around the restaurant, at the wealth and privilege that insulated him from ordinary human struggles. "When your mother told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I couldn't see past my own fear to understand what I was destroying. I told myself I was choosing the company over one relationship. I was too blind to see I was choosing emptiness over love. Mom says love means choosing someone even when it's hard." The simple wisdom of that statement, delivered by a 10-year-old who'd learned it through abandonment, cut deeper than any shareholder rebuke or business failure Marcus had experienced. "Your mother is wiser than I am," Marcus admitted. "I built an empire predicting human behavior through algorithms, but I failed to predict the one thing that mattered most, that success without family is just expensive loneliness." He reached across the table, offering his hand with the same vulnerability he showed to no one in his professional life. "I can't change the past, but I'm asking, if you'll let me, to try to be the father you deserved from the beginning." Elijah stared at the offered hand. This wasn't a business transaction. This wasn't a contract that lawyers could enforce or algorithms could optimize. This was a broken man asking a child for forgiveness he didn't deserve and offering effort that would take years to prove genuine. The boy took his father's hand, not with enthusiasm or immediate trust, but with the tentative hope of someone willing to risk believing in possibility one more time. "You have to be there," Elijah said firmly. "Not just your money. You, at my science fairs, at Maya's dance recitals, when Mom is scared after chemotherapy, not when it's convenient, when it matters." "When it matters," Marcus repeated, understanding that he'd just accepted the most important contract of his life, one measured not in quarterly returns but in presence, in showing up, in the slow accumulation of trust rebuilt from rubble. 6 months later, the hospital room looked nothing like the place where Jasmine Williams had once faced death, with whatever dignity poverty allowed. Windows overlooked the bay. Soft art lined the walls. The machines hummed quietly, no longer sounding like a countdown. Jasmine sat propped against pillows, a colorful scarf wrapped around her head. Chemotherapy had thinned her frame, but not her presence. At her bedside, Elijah worked through calculus problems meant for students years older. Maya practiced piano scales on a small keyboard balanced across the tray table, and Marcus sat nearby, reading medical journals and asking careful questions, the kind that told doctors he wasn't there to write checks and leave. "You don't have to come every day," Jasmine said gently. Forgiveness hadn't erased the past. It had only made room to survive it. "The company can wait," Marcus replied. And for the first time, He meant it without resentment. His board complained. Stock analysts speculated. But markets corrected themselves. Childhood didn't. Elijah looked up from his work. Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you'll judge the science fair next month. I'll be there. The whole day. The whole day. Maya, seeing the kindness Marcus had shown her mother, climbed into his lap with the easy trust of a child who finally felt safe. She didn't know the history. She only knew this was the man who had brought the food and the doctors. "Thank you, Mr. Marcus," she whispered, leaning her head against his expensive suit. Marcus looked at Elijah. The boy didn't call him Daddy yet. That would take years. But as Marcus held the little girl and watched his son solve calculus problems, he knew he wasn't just paying for his own child's life. He was building a family out of the wreckage he had caused 10 years ago. Marcus smiled, not the polished expression from magazine covers, but something quieter, something earned. He'd spent his life believing the most important calculations could be optimized. He was wrong. Love wasn't efficient. Trust didn't compound overnight. Family couldn't be rebuilt with shortcuts. It required showing up, again and again. The question that shattered his life, "Daddy, I'm so hungry, can I eat with you?" had demanded more than food. It demanded presence, and this time, Marcus Cooper stayed. If this story moved you, like and share it, because silence protects harm, but courage rewrites lives. And for more stories where truth refuses to stay buried, subscribe. Because success means nothing if you abandon the people who need you most.